Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Phoebe Atkinson, and I, along with Caroline, were the curators for this program, the Positivity Hour. And Caroline has a birthday tomorrow, and as well as our guest today. So it is really awesome. And I'm standing in for Caroline today to speak to our guest, Denise Fowler. So welcome, everyone. People are popping on, and I'm so excited about our topic today. I was just saying to Denise that this is a topic that is very timely in terms of the opportunities and the reimagining around people's work, as well as a topic that is not talked about a lot in this series about shame and as it relates to career, and then blending in such important work. So welcome. We're going to try to make it as interactive as possible. We're going to have a discussion and then also prompt you to contribute and then have that in an interactive way. So let me introduce my colleague and fellow SIP alumni from our certificate in positive psychology, Denise Fowler. Welcome, Denise.
Thank you.
So great to see you. Let me tell the group about you. Denise is a career happiness coach, and she is going to be speaking today about shame, and as relates to career shame, as she defines it, the state of being overworked and underhappy. Denise has written quite a bit for us in the Whole Being Institute, her blogs, and we'll include those tomorrow when you receive the recording. So Denise's blurb says, learn why it is so rampant, this career shame in our society, and why are we so unwilling to make a change when it happens to us? Discover the barriers to unmasking career shame, the power of vulnerability, and the opportunities the pandemic has given us to reimagine the world of work. By connecting positive psychology resources and career exploration action steps, Denise will help us learn how to take off the double mask of career shame and make different life choices to experience career happiness. So there's a lot in there, and we're going to unpack that throughout our time together. Let me read a little bit and tell you about Denise's background. It is absolutely fascinating, as so many of our guests and our alumni of our programs. Denise took a crazy winding path to her finding her own career happiness, including living on less than $600 a month as an AmeriCorps Vista member after college, teaching environmental education in the woods of Montana with no electricity, and quitting her job at 30 to travel and volunteer in Asia. Denise found professional happiness when she discovered her calling as a career development specialist, bringing a strengths-based, positive framework to inspire individuals for professional and life happiness. With over 25 years experience in the nonprofit and higher education sectors, Denise is currently the Director of Career Development and Alumni Services at George Washington University at the Trattenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration, Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and American Institute of Architects. A regular contributor to the Whole Being Institute's blog, she writes on the integration of positive psychology and career development. Denise's certifications include Gallup Strengths Coaching, Positive Psychology, she's an alumni of our SIP program, Global Career Development Facilitation, Social Media Profile Writing, Advanced Resume Writing, Federal Career Coaching, and Certified in Positive Psychology Coaching. Wow, Denise. There is so much here, and we welcome you and with our minds and hearts. And I know you were with us last year when you came to speak shortly after the birth of your twins. So this is auspicious to be with you again, also as you celebrate a birthday coming up. So where would you like to start today? There's so many aspects of your blurb about unmasking career shame, the concept of it, and all of that.
You know, as you were talking to me, there's a couple things to touch on. And I think one of the things that pops up the most to me as I was preparing for this talk today was that I've written a lot on career shame through the years. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I've been thinking a lot about this in the past couple of years, and then the pandemic I think really illuminated this even more so. I write about career shame. People deal with it. People come to me, but they're still stuck. And so I started to think and go deeper and be like, what is it that's making them stuck? And I realized this theme of that the career shame is underneath these two masks. That we're accepting not being happy, and we're accepting overworking to avoid feeling the career shame. So it's like I couldn't even get to the career shame with people. When I work with people, and this is, what's extraordinary to me about this, Phoebe, is when I work with career shame, I get this from students at my graduate school where, at GW, that are 22 years old feeling career shame. And I get this with people that are 52 years old. So it looks and shows up really differently. And I was thinking about this and seeing what are these themes and what's getting in the way. As I wrote in my blog, like, we all know what we need to do. We need to, talk to people. We need to talk to our boss. We need to think about different career paths. But it requires, as I was shaping this into the blog, it requires us to be vulnerable. And that's the vaccine. And that is a vaccine that there is still a lot of hesitancy.
Yes. Wow. So you're really bringing in this concept of career shame, which we will have you define. Rachel has asked that question, as well as then to tie that in with Brene Brown's work on vulnerability. I know that's a very central focus for you, as well as then this idea of the vulnerability vaccine that you wrote about in your recent blog.
Yeah. So the way I define career shame is, and there's not one definition. And I think a better way versus specifically defining it is to explain how I see it shows up. So I have seen it show up in, actually, I'll talk about myself at first before I came into career services. I spent over a decade in nonprofits, and that was how I defined myself. Yet it wasn't the right fit for me. So when I was working on a grant, it ran out of funding. I ended up in career services, and I was ashamed that I was leaving this field of poverty alleviation work. Oh my gosh, who was going to judge me? I'd been doing all this good work for so long, and now I was going to be doing career work, which wasn't, oh, I'm saving the world, this is on my shoulders kind of work. So it shows up with that, with how people are judging you. It will show up. Sometimes I have people who say, I need to make money. So I thought I wanted to do this line of work, but I need to do something else because I'm a sole breadwinner, but I'm selling out. Or I've had people where career shame shows up where, why is someone else getting advancement and I'm not? Why am I not being recognized? Why am I not good enough? So it shows up in this way that becomes rampant, that it's more than just like a little like, oh, I didn't do well in this presentation, but it becomes internalized. It's this way of viewing ourselves, and career is such a broad definition. It's this, what I'm going to say is you and I talked about this, that it's pervasive. It goes even more beyond just someone's career, and that they end up in a broader way in their life.
So what I'm hearing, Denise, is that you shared in your own story that you wanted to make a transition, and you came up against all of these beliefs and within yourself. And then you're giving the example of other people in terms of defining career shame, the sense of feeling like you're not fulfilling expectations, or you are comparing yourself to other people and living a story. And there's a kind of foreclosed identity there, and you don't really see other possibilities.
Yeah, and it's as you and I were talking earlier, Adam Grant, I just watched that video, which was phenomenal, when he talks about, I love this term, identity foreclosure. I did that. I wrote down the definition I just watched, is settling prematurely on a sense of who you are without full exploration.
Yes, and Denise, for those who are listening, Adam Grant has a new book out. He is a scholar at the Wharton School, and his new book is called Think Again, and it's all about changing your mind. Go ahead.
And we do this early on. This is who I am. And, we were talking earlier with Sherry Kelly, Dr. Kelly, about neuroscience. And I am not a neuroscientist. I don't have a doctorate. This isn't an area, but I read a lot about this. And you read about biologically how we are wired to protect
Mhm.
ourselves, right?
Mhm.
You know, we're wired for survival. So it is easier for us to come up with, this is our definition. We have
Mhm.
that confirmation bias. And it was
Mhm.
interesting that Adam talked about that. The smarter you are, the
Mhm.
more likely you are to get caught in this confirmation bias. It's
Mhm.
easier to accept that. So we
Mhm.
get caught in, I am an accountant. I am, someone wrote earlier in here around, I saw this in the chat box, around parenthood. You know, I am a
Mhm.
mom, I am a
Mhm.
dad. You
Mhm.
get this identity, so you
Mhm.
feel like nothing else you're going to
Mhm.
do, you reject
Mhm.
it.
Yes, and
Because
this happens early on. Adam Grant talks about the worst question that a parent can ask is, what do you want to be when you grow up? Because often that will become, people will have tunnel vision. They'll start to be bound to this, and they'll double down and kind of lock in. He says that the GPS goes right into a single target. And then again, that foreclosed identity happens, that we are really then, as you said, just the confirmation bias, we continue to reinforce that.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to say, someone put something in here, and I write about this in the blog, and I want to put this right out here. Not everybody has the luxury to have this exploration.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
someone wrote this in here about middle America. And I'm not even sure I would say it's middle America. I would
Mhm.
say it is, there are people who cannot make a choice.
Mhm.
They have to overwork. They
Mhm.
have to accept another job because of life circumstances. And
Mhm.
it could be middle America. It could be, in other reasons. It could be somebody who is very wealthy, who is the
Mhm.
only breadwinner in their family, who has other circumstances. So when I talk about
Mhm.
this, I talk
Mhm.
about this for people who have the ability at this point in their life to make a different decision,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
it can ebb and flow in their life.
Right, right.
And one other
Mhm.
clarification I want to say about this, and this gets into Amy Raninsky's work around
Mhm.
work orientation and job
Mhm.
crafting, is this isn't just something that's a luxury for people who have what we perceive in our country as the high level careers.
Mhm.
People can be really proud of their work at any career. What is sometimes perceived as a lower level job,
Mhm.
there's just so many stories about this. And there's an article I recently wrote. A lot of times we would look at someone, say, who is cleaning a hospital as having a lower level job. And
Mhm.
she has stories about the pride that they feel about the choices they've made about their career and how they view their career and the
Mhm.
relation that they have to it. So it
Mhm.
is important for people to know that some of this is not a choice that you can
Mhm.
have, but if you
Mhm.
do have this choice, it requires you to
Mhm.
take that look. And then if you're in a situation, how you actually look at your career.
And I think that this is such an important part of positive psychology focus. We look at the locus of control in people's subjective experience as to what part of this is within my control. And a lot of the job crafting research has to do with our attitudes and really defining, making meaning out of what we're doing and our contribution there. So this again is called job crafting. It's from the Positive Organizational Scholarship Threads of Research, and Amy Wojciechowski, her research is really having to do with meaning making at work and how do we refine and redefine our roles using our strengths, and really maybe you'll talk about that a little later on.
And thank you for clarifying how to pronounce her name. Can you pronounce it again? Because I have always pronounced it wrong.
It might be, I think it's Wojciechowski or Wojcinski. I'm not quite sure. I'll have
Yeah.
to listen for that. But I'm glad I could say at least who that is and where that falls in terms of the locus of control and how we can define how we look at things, and considering that.
And actually, this is a good time, Phoebe. I'm going to talk a little bit about this because I do
Mhm.
think that this it's incredibly relevant to what we're talking about this very moment. Is when she talks about job crafting, and if you all go online right now and you can look and you can see a lot of research and a lot of tools that they use on this.
Mhm.
But one of the things when I did this talk today, I wanted to think about is not everybody is going to have time to do these
Mhm.
workshops and to sit down and really recraft your job. And
Mhm.
sometimes it doesn't need to take that
Mhm.
much time. It requires vulnerability. So she talks about that there's three ways to really rethink and to rethink
Mhm.
your work and to do this job crafting is one, to look at your tasks, one
Mhm.
to look at relationships, and one to look at cognitively, like the meaning that
Mhm.
you put behind this. And some of this can be really minor things. I think about relational.
Mhm.
A lot of us, I'm sure, have been in job situations with people that are toxic or negative environments, right? So I mean, I remember there was one time where I had somebody that was very toxic to me, and I know it sounds so funny, but I would just envision a big giant bell jar going on top of me whenever she would talk. She was a boss, I had to respect and listen to her, but it gave me protection from that energy
Mhm.
that she was giving out to me. So it just visually was a visual way that worked for me. Relationally, sometimes is thinking about, am I spending time with people that I like to spend time with in my office? Tasks, I think, is really critical, particularly talking about the overworking.
Mhm.
An activity that I have a lot of my clients do is we look at all the work that they've been doing and we
Mhm.
put it in categories and really looking at things that they are from novice to an expert in,
Mhm.
and from what they dislike to what they love. And we put this into a giant matrix. I've had people do it on walls or spreadsheets. And what we start to find is there are a lot of tasks we've defaulted into, either because we're known that we're good at it and other people ask us to do it, or because we're too afraid to speak up and say, I don't like this, or we're afraid to say, I don't know. I don't want to be doing this anymore. This doesn't feel good to me. And again, it goes back to, it requires you to be vulnerable with supervisors and with colleagues to
Mhm.
say, this isn't my area of expertise, or this doesn't light me up,
Mhm. Mhm.
which is very scary to speak up about that.
Mhm. And I know, Denise, you've written about that, about the both the nature and the strategic intervention of setting boundaries. So I'm thinking about that when you have those courageous conversations, knowing yourself, really building on that kind of assessment of your own awareness as to what your strengths are, what you're good at, and then having those conversations and having the structures and the support in place to prepare, which is really where coaching comes in as well.
You know, Phoebe, my husband always laughs at me, doesn't really laugh at me, when I say, oh, I'm so excited I had a client or a student cry today.
Mm.
And, he thinks he doesn't really laugh at me, but because he knows that I get so excited about it, which other people might think is odd. But to me,
Mhm.
so many times when people cry,
Mhm.
it comes out of when I am talking to them and asking them, what are you great at?
Mm. Mhm.
I will often ask someone, what are you great at? And either they won't know and they start to cry, or they'll come back to me and say, well, I'm good at this. I kind of think of this. So I'll say, I just want to pause for a second and just ask you again, what are you great with? What lights you up? And people will cry.
Mm.
I am so excited by that, because then they're getting beyond this mask, right?
Mhm.
This
Mhm.
mask of this hiding for themselves, and they're allowing themselves to be vulnerable and say, I don't know, or I love this, I'm great at this, but nobody ever told me I was great at this. I
Mhm.
worked with a client yesterday and we were working on her resume. And to me, working with someone's resume allows them the gifts of that. And I was looking at this and looking at the job we were matching this up to, and just simply said to her, wow, it sounds like your skills are really aligned to this. Whole face light up. She said, I haven't had anybody say that to me.
Mm.
So that idea of knowing our strengths,
Mhm. Mhm.
something as simple as that. So a
Mhm.
lot of times we have forgotten it. We've had, we talk about this with the negativity bias. If somebody says something negative to us, we're wired to remember this. We're not wired. With the research, it shows when something positive, the savoring happens. We need to take the time to really think about it and
Mhm.
remember that, so we forget the
Mhm.
positives that someone
Mhm.
says.
Mhm.
So taking the time to do this, but simple activities. I tell people, send an email to 5 or 10 of your close friends. Just ask them, what words or phrases would you use to describe me? Something
Mhm.
as simple as that can
Mhm.
reshape how you're looking at yourself. Now,
Mhm.
some of the younger kids who are on, well, I think when I say Facebook now, I think I'm old for Facebook. I think they use all
Mm.
this TikTok and Twitter and
Mhm.
all this kind of stuff, but Instagram. And I tell them, send a message out on Facebook. And I tell them, blame it on me. Say, a career coach asked me to do this. What would you consider my top greatest strengths? And to get the feedback from a lot of people on
Mhm.
this.
Yes.
Look at old performance evaluations, look at letters of recommendation,
Mhm.
ask family members. So it's easy, again, I'm trying to think about easy ways for
Yes.
people to allow themselves to be vulnerable about
Yeah.
this.
And Denise, to connect that in again with the job crafting work in the University of Michigan Positive Organizational Scholarship. That is the application of positive psychology in organizations. They have a research application of this kind of 360 where it's called the reflected best self, where of course you have people, like you said, 3 to 10 people really elicit from them, when have you seen me at my best? So in positive psychology, we look at what's strong, what's working, and then they call that, and then they do their own assessment, and that feeds into the job crafting. So it's a really nice complement to what you've just shared, because then you have also, for those of you who are interested, the body of research called the reflected best self.
I love that. And let me simplify it even further, because sometimes everybody's not going to do to that extent. I used to do an activity that was when I would run workshops on this, where I just had someone write down their story about a time when they've been at their best. When I do, the Strength Finders workshops, I've been doing those, and write that down. And then if you're using Gallup or you're using VIA, you can use the VIA list of strengths or just any list of strengths. Take 2 minutes. That's all I have people do, is share for 2 minutes a story when you've been at your best with another person. Then give them 2 minutes to just reflect what they've heard. And then I give people just 1 minute to talk about it. So we're talking about something that could be 5 minutes. And just to hear what somebody sees in you for just one example of this. So I love the example that you gave, and I know people won't always maybe do broader. They're not going to have time to do this. So something small. It can be something if you're in a position of leadership at your organization, or even if you have a voice in that, to say, hey, listen, at the next staff meeting we're all doing virtually, maybe we could do something like that.
Right. And I know that you're pulling from so much of your own experience, Denise, as well as the positive psychology interventions, that the appreciative inquiry, or looking through the lens of strengths, to get people to really light up times when they've been at their best, and then to be able to pull that forward as a blueprint, as a reference.
Yeah. Yeah. A question that came through here that I want to address. And please keep these questions going. Thank goodness as a mom of twins, I'm a good multitasker. And as someone put this question in there about parenthood, the shame and kind of taking the off ramp from parenthood. And as someone who, as Phoebe mentioned, it's my birthday. I'm turning 50 tomorrow, and I have a 9-month twin, so I am a later in life mom. I met my husband not even 3 years ago. My love of my life, worth the wait. And the reason I tell that story is that everybody has their own story, and it is so easy to get defined by somebody else's version of what your story should be. And one of the activities that I love, and that I think can help people, who are taking maybe a path where they're in parenthood, or any other path. I've had clients who've had to take time off to care for an aging relative, an aging parent. Is your best possible life activity we did at the WBI when we were up at Capallo. And I remember I love this activity, and it takes a very short amount of time. And I'll tell you about the activity and why I think this is really valuable for people. Is 4 days in a row, you take 20 minutes. So that's all you need to do. Don't type it. When we learned about this, we said, write it, because it helps process in your brain. Set your timer for 20 minutes, find a time when it's quiet. I recommend usually people do it at the end of the evening, before it's too late that they're so tired, but that they've started to shut off from their day. Write about that. It's later in life. When I work with clients who are much earlier, I see someone says The Future Self by Dr. Laura King. That if you're younger, write maybe another 20, 25 years. If you're like my age, you can write as if you're retired. 4 different days, someone sits next to you and says, I heard, Phoebe, everything came true in your life that you ever wanted. What happened? And as you all taught us, the critical part is, what did you do to make that happen? And you just write, and about halfway through, your hand's going to feel like it's going to fall off. But it's usually at that point where you stop censoring yourself to the shoulds of what your life can be, and it is to what you really are. And you do this 4 days in a row. I always encourage people not to read it until after you're done, and then to take it and read it and reflect on it. Why I think that really addresses when the person talks about when you're taking the off ramp for your career, when you're raising children, or any other reason, is a couple things. Is one, it gives you the long perspective of your life. You get to see what maybe you did before, or what you're going to be doing later. So you might be in the middle of this right now, the thick of this now, but you're going to be down the road. You'll be thinking, okay, well, maybe when my children are starting school, I might start to do a side business on this, or I might volunteer in this way, that you can define what your impact is, that it doesn't need to be in a career. It also, what I love that I've seen clients get out of this is it helps you to understand what your values are.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're making not just career decisions, but life decisions based on those values, you're able to have a better acceptance of where you are in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you've taken some time off or you're in a job that's not exactly right, you're taking that time to say, is this aligned to my values?
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned, Phoebe, to you earlier, my husband and I, family and slowing down in life is such an intentional mindset that we cherish. He is an incredible man who often gets asked to move into management, and he works in a government agency. He always says no to it because it's not aligned to his values. So instead of getting pulled by the shiny thing, which we often do, which pulls us into that career shame, I went to the shiny thing, it wasn't right. If you know what your values are, what are those top 5, 6 values that matter to you? You're going to say, do I want this job? Do I want this other project at work? Do I want to work late? Does it fit with my values?
Right. So you've said so much already, Denise, and this is such a very important example of taking time to make that assessment and really to gain self-awareness around what's most important to you. And I think the pandemic is really giving us the opportunity, and I know that's part of what you wanted to talk about. And it's also part of what you call the vulnerability vaccine, that when you really spend that 30 minutes and you do a self-assessment and then you have a different perspective, you can make some informed choices. But before we go there, let's go back up to the balcony for a minute. So you've defined unmasking the career shame as those dimensions. And then you've also talked about the power of vulnerability. And we've started to get into some strategies as well as really looking at opportunities during the pandemic. Can we go back to the shame vulnerability piece? And do you want to say anything more about Brene Brown's work and how this ties in? Because I know that this is very core to what you write about and you're informed by her work, and her work is very much about application. And boy, has it really hit a nerve throughout time with many, many people.
I loved, again, in preparation for this, because I was like, oh my gosh, do I know enough about this? Let me go back and I was watching some more of Brene Brown's TED Talks and reading some of her research. And I love this reminder of what bottom line of what shame is. It's a fear of disconnection.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If people know this about me, I am not worthy of this connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I love also a phrase that she said, like, it requires excruciating vulnerability to get in there.
Mm-hmm.
So if I tell somebody, from a work perspective, I don't want to be doing this, or this isn't the right job for me, I'm going to be disconnected from my tribe, which we know from a biological standpoint, we want to be a part of our tribe. I'm not going to, when I made the decision to go to career, I'm not going to be a part of the Save the World tribe anymore. Where's my tribe going to fit in?
Mm-hmm.
If I say no to a management role, it's not going to be my tribe, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I completely shift paths, what is this going to say? What are people going to say about me? I am not worthy, which is this brings up this shame. It was interesting is she said that in her research, and I was reviewing this, and I love this, there's 3 things. When she found people who operate from a sense of courage, who do feel worthy and don't struggle with this shame that as a lot of people do, she found 3 things, and I love this: the courage to be imperfect, the compassion to themselves first and then others, and she was really clear that it was to self first, and the authority to let go of this vision of what they think they should be and embracing who they actually are.
So what you're describing is really her strategies that came out of that, the daring way. And the price that you pay really is to dive deeply into who am I and all these different parts, what's important, and really highlighting the need to belong, the need to connect. And what's at stake is our fear of disconnection.
And which, as you said, with the pandemic,
Mhm,
I mean, and we have been disconnected in so many levels
mhm, mhm,
that, it's been interesting that on the news, they're saying, well, people don't want to go back to work, and it's for all these, political reasons. And
mhm,
some of it is true, but I think a lot of this is people have, it's been tough because people have been disconnected from each other, but it's forced them to connect with themselves in deeper
mhm,
ways. In a lot
mhm,
of ways, it's
mhm,
been scary for people, but
mhm,
as they're making different decisions about how to connect,
mhm,
whether it's, do we want to be involved in that social group anymore? That volunteer activity? Do we want to go to these events? Do we want to go back to that same job? It is
mhm,
making us question. I think for a lot of people, the pandemic forced us to have courage that maybe we hadn't had before because we had a
mhm.
lot of time by ourselves.
Yes, and as well as the work of our Surgeon General right now, his book Together that we've presented on, that this idea that we're really reconnecting to the power and the importance of relationships in our lives, and in addition to the relationship with ourselves. So, anything more about this shame, vulnerability, need for belonging, connection, and as it relates to this career shame, and also the strategies for moving into more alignment with who you really are?
I think so many of us, who we really are, we were that way when we were younger. We're that way
Mhm,
with certain friends or family in our life. And if you can reflect it, and I know Brene Brown has people do this activity where you take a really, really tiny piece of paper and you write
mhm,
down the people that matter to you.
mhm,
If you could take that the step further to think about, with those people, what is it about them and what is it about the way that you are with them? And then as you begin to think about you going into the world, particularly the career mask of unhappiness, if you were in a work environment surrounded by people like that, what would that look like? Who would those people be with, and what that can be? I'm going to use a really specific example about myself. Is so I'm a director of a career center as my full-time job. Now, I work in a community of people, my school, my faculty, my boss, my colleagues are like this. We care about each other. We do really, really good work and work in the world. But the bottom line is our culture is a culture of caring, my
mhm,
colleagues.
mhm,
If I was a director of a career center, there are tons of jobs at career centers that aren't in that culture. And
mhm,
that might work for somebody else, but it doesn't work for me.
mhm.
So it's not the job, it's the where you're housed in there. So by knowing and taking that time to think about what kind of place would make you happy like that, what kind of people make you happy, as you start to reemerge in the world, who do you want to spend time with? You want to think about, what's the kind of culture of a work environment that I want to be in, where I can say I am happy here, where I can say I need to go home and I don't need to overwork.
So important what you're saying, because we're not standing alone. We're working and living in ecosystems. And so, along with your own self-assessment and your contribution and what you want that to be, finding those places where you can really contribute. And I know we're talking about a lot of positive psychology strategies and tying all this in, coming back to what we've already covered. We've looked at career shame and also the vulnerability, the Brene Brown intersection in your work, and the power of setting boundaries and knowing yourself. We've talked about confirmation bias and thinking again, the work of Adam Grant. We've also talked about authenticity a lot. We had Dr. Maria Serrois last Thursday speaking about that as it relates to
Favorite people.
re-entering, right, the kind of new normal. But the science of VIA and the strengths, and Gallup as well, we know that we're at our most authentic when we are using our signature strengths. And I know that this is getting now into kind of the strategies that you suggest. How do you really align yourself with being at your best, and knowing what those are, so then you can be able to really contribute from that very empowered place?
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's an activity that I have people do that it's based on, and I hope I pronounce his name right because he's one of my
Mhm,
favorite people, is Mikhail
mhm.
Csikszentmihalyi.
Yes,
Close enough.
you got it.
And I'm just going to share a little story, which I think can help illuminate this. In an activity I have people do is, I remember I met him at the second Positive Psychology Conference, and I was honestly very intimidated by meeting him, like everybody.
Mhm,
He's extraordinary, and I just view myself, I don't have a doctorate, as I say, I don't have a master's in positive psychology. And I said to him, I said, I use your work in positive psychology as a career
mhm,
coach And I love what he said. He said, it's people like you that make the research real.
Yes.
And
Yes.
in that moment of connection and authenticity,
Mhm.
he allowed me to be seen, which is again what
Mm.
Brown talks about, right?
Yes.
We
Mhm.
just wanted to be seen and valued. So here it is, someone
Yes.
who's preeminent in the field,
Yeah.
and he said that. And I love his work around flow.
Which is what he's most known for.
Oh, and what I encourage people to do is there's 8 characteristics of what he describes when you feel flow. And you don't have to feel them all the time in every moment to be able to have flow, but they help you recognize this. One of them is when you lose track of sense of time. So you can look at all, and I that one to me is often a really big indicator for people. But what I do is I ask clients to take time to write 5 to 10 times they have felt flow in their life. From a career perspective, I encourage them first and foremost to look at their work, to find things from their work, but they may or may not always find enough of them in their work. So sometimes they look at other times and moments in their life. What's critical about this is it's not like, oh, I did this for a month. It's like when I did this presentation for 3 hours, I worked on this project for half a day. They're short term. And what I like about the way that I ask clients to do it is, one, it taps into their strengths. So in one piece, you want to be thinking about, what strengths did I do in this situation? Was it my ability to connect with people, to present, to do research, to win a new client over? What is it? But not just that, but also to take it bigger and to think situationally. Was I working with other people? Was there a deadline? What was the end result? Was it something that was public or something that's private? Because it's going to help you understand. And this is where I think strengths is really critical to understand. Your strengths don't operate in a vacuum. As I said, like if I was a director of a career center in a place that was in a culture where it was super competitive and demanding, my strengths, as we talk about, instead of being in a balcony, would go into a basement. I worked at a nonprofit once that was very toxic, and positivity is one of my strengths. No surprise. I became a Pollyanna. It was so not authentic. So when you do this activity around flow, it is so important to think about, what was the situation? What was the container that I was in? So how do I have my strength to be in a balcony versus a basement when I do this?
Yes.
And when I tell people to work on this, you don't need to write these out in real detail. You can just bullet point them. I've actually had clients that are super creative that have drawn pictures and like put visuals. So whatever works for you. Sometimes for other people, they might talk about it into someone else or just verbally record themselves down. So find a way that works for how your brain is wired. So again, it doesn't need to be these long paragraphs, but then write these down using his characteristics to think about this. And then begin to think about what this means. An example I'm going to give you is I did this for a client, and I love this example because it was a time when it failed for somebody and it was powerful. She came back to the session, she did her 10, and she started to talk to me about it, very matter-of-factly explaining it. And then she started to cry. I love when someone cries. And she said, basically, this is a load of crap. She said, I actually never felt flow. And this was a highly accomplished professional woman in the nonprofit world. She started to explain to me that the only time she'd ever felt flow was that she had applied for a job at a school of social work, and they needed someone with an MSW. She didn't have it, and she had written this letter, and she loved writing the letter. And then it turns out she'd always wanted to get an MSW. And it turns out that all of her friends were social workers. So listen, she had a mortgage, kids, a full-time job. But when you talk about mapping this out and thinking about this, she crafted her job to be able to downgrade it a little bit and started a part-time program to get an MSW in her 40s.
What a powerful
She had been feeling shame
example.
about
And
the decision she had made. Yeah.
yes, and it sounds like a central support for her was your presence as a coach. And I know that when Cheek Sent Me High saw you in that way, it was a pivot point for you. You were able to really consider the power of the contribution that you make as a coach, your training, as well as that role that you provide for people.
I often say all I am is just a mirror who just turns the mirror just a little bit so someone can see themselves differently.
And I also hear, with all of your credentials, the positive psychology is a lens that is central to how you mirror, what you listen for, and what you reflect back.
Yeah. So that's an activity. And it just reminded me of another story. I just want to share another question that I just the other day, I got an extraordinary email from a former client back, and it was amazing. And we just did a couple sessions together. And there was a question that I asked her that I encourage people to ask themselves. And she was feeling a lot of, I believe, a lot of career shame up until now, about not fulfilling what really made her happy. And I just said, what career decision would you regret if you did not take later on in life? And 1 to 10, how much would you regret it? It was a very, very simple question. Like, if you didn't do something, which one would you regret the most? And 1 to 10, how much? And it was something very strong. And she is doing a complete radical shift in her career, radical shift, just from recognizing how much she would regret it.
So a powerful question as a coach is your part of your toolkit, as well as then helping her to go back and find those values, to really dig down deep, and then to create, I'm sure, whatever scaffolding or support you needed to help her take those next steps.
Yeah, very much.
So those are some of the examples. Fantastic. And I know you also talked about strategies, and you also referenced in the blog the vulnerability vaccine. And, we're back in that exploration right now about resources and also the pandemic opportunities. And we also want to invite people to type in if you have a question for Denise. So as we think about where we are now, do you want to move into that next piece of any other specific strategies or?
Well, yes, but not really, because to be vulnerable, I can't prescribe a strategy. We each have things that are going to work for them,
Right.
We know what a lot of them are. For some people, it's mindfulness meditation. For other people, I think gratitude is such an extraordinary one for allowing yourself to be vulnerable. It is, I think, as I was writing this and thinking about in preparation for today, I really was struggling, to be honest with you, about how you can help someone be vulnerable. And I can't, because it is such an individual decision to allow yourself. And this is why I think Brene Brown has been, resonated so deeply with people, because it is terrifying. And one of the things that I think that we all have been doing and exploring under the pandemic is figuring out what brings us back to ourselves. And I would say to people is that you have to, before you can even start to think about how to be vulnerable, you need to just slow down and just do things that bring you back to yourself, whatever that is. And again, I know it's tough under the pandemic because some of it is external for some people. And then, I'm not a therapist, but it often requires asking the question. And I asked this in my blog, I wrote that question down, what do overworking and accepting unhappiness help me avoid in my life? Because it's often the sense of avoidance. If I work hard enough, I can run away from career shame. That, to me, overworking allows people to run away from it. I can avoid being vulnerable if I feel like if I work hard enough, or if I accept being unhappy, I can be that submission to boredom, and I can lull myself into that. The other question I have on there is, what false negative beliefs am I holding on to protect from rejection? I mean, it is very scary to allow ourselves to be in that place of these false beliefs that we have about ourselves.
In that same blog, Denise, you say, yes, it's scary and it's messy, but you actually give us that vulnerability vaccine prompts, to take those 30 minutes, to take some time to really answer. What are some of the questions there that you have us reflect on?
So that was one of them that I put on there. One that I put that I think is really powerful is, what would life look like if I was free from career shame? And thinking about this, an activity that I did with a client that was a little risky a while ago, and I would say almost, and I didn't put this question on here, but you might ask yourself, is what would life look like if I stayed stuck in career shame? So that 4 days in a row activity of my ideal life, best possible self life, the Lauren King work. I had a client do in the reverse. Like if she didn't make any changes, what would her life look like down the road? And it scared her. It reminds me almost of, what is it? Scrooge, Ghost of the Future. But if you never escape this, what would your life look like? Is that enough to make you say, I don't want this anymore?
So you're really talking about the price we pay both individually and also in our organizations as well as our community if we're not really bringing our best self. And so having these different interventions, these different perspectives, again, to really get us in touch with where is our agency, where is our own self-determining, and what's going to be maybe the cost or the price, and also what are some of the supports I would need.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at some of the questions that came
Yes,
in.
let's get to those.
Yeah. And one thing I want to add to you on this is, another question I have on there is, what would I do professionally if I didn't care what anyone thought of me? And just a quick example I had with a client that I did that, where he said, it was fascinating. He said, I would be a professor of string theory. And I was like, oh my gosh, fortunately I've been watching Big Bang Theory. I knew what this meant. This was a while ago. This was someone who was much further along in their career. And that wasn't the answer. And this gets to what you and I are talking about, that you can't always just follow your bliss. I'm not a Pollyanna with this. But he did some research on this and he realized that string theory, the thinking behind it, that he is at his best when he thinks about big data. Which wasn't that far from his career. And it kind of gets in, I'm looking at some of the questions that are on here around pivoting and earning money. I met with him several years ago, and I've actually met with him in ensuing years, as he has said, okay, in my job, how can I do what I like to call leaning out of my job? Right. So how could he, if that's what he wanted to do, how could he move and expand his job definition? Sheryl Sandberg's talking about leaning in. I talked to people about leaning out, leaning forward and expanding your job definition so he could take on more big data. Then what can I do outside of my job? So he began to take other courses in big data, this day and age with everything online. So then he'd be able to pivot into a salary point that would make sense for him. Because as someone said there, you can't, sometimes some people are able to take radical career shifts and they're able to drop down financially. And a lot of times you can't. So you have to think about it through stepping stone process. How can you move and pivot? I often think about, and the person used the word pivot, in basketball, you keep one leg down and you move one leg. It's not you're jumping and moving with the ball. So how can you keep one leg down and move a little bit closer and then move a little bit closer from there?
And one of the things that I hear in your description is really pulling from hope theory, which is the research around the GPA. And I know that is central to how you help people navigate, as well as the small chunking down, those steps that you take. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, I do. And I always breaks my heart about losing Shane Lopez, who was just one of the preeminent researchers on this. And I love his book. It's called Making Hope Happen.
Yes.
Highly, highly recommend it. And one of the things, when you just brought that up, it reminds me that he talks about that I was always fascinated by his idea of re-goaling. And as the person talked about with parenting or that you or different decisions you've made in your career where you kind of feel like you're really off track, is you have to let go of this goal that you thought you had. And to do that, you have to mourn it. I'm a really big fan of Gabrielle Ettinger's work, Rethinking Positive Thinking, because it's not a Pollyanna approach to this, where it's understanding that there is a negative side to this, and to let go of a goal, to rethink positive thinking requires being okay and being, which might mean shedding tears, grieving for a goal that was lost. And you have to go through that. But as part of the re-goaling process, it is identifying another goal. So while you're simultaneously grieving and as you're moving from that, and I've done that activity in a workshop where I literally will have people write down the goal that they're letting go of, take steps away, get a actual physical distance and perspective, and then write down a new goal and then look at it and move closer to that and think about it. And along the lines of Shane Lopez's work, which the pathways are one of the most critical pieces of this, is that you have to know that there's going to be multiple pathways to getting to that goal.
And I'm thinking about what Adam Grant said in his new book. He said, choosing a career, it's possible that your ideal job hasn't even been invented yet. So this idea, rather than if we go from the foreclosed identity and then opening up to possibilities, whether it's a voluntary or involuntary shift, to really do that assessment and then open yourself up. And part of the pathways thinking is trying on new things and understanding that these are experiments that we're going to allow with that growth mindset, with a lot of self-compassion, taking small actions, experimenting, gaining that feedback, hopefully with a coach or a support group that can help you as you're stepping into these new roles and as your identity is shifting.
I love the book Design Your Life. That is a phenomenal book based on the concept of human-centered design, and they talk about rapid prototyping. How you part of the exploration, which they do mind mapping, which is really messy, again, requires vulnerability to do something like mind mapping, to figure out what it is that really, to get beyond your head into your heart and to open up. And you have to come from it from a place of maybe not the reason, not the stories we're telling, and to do the mind mapping, but then to do this rapid prototyping, to talk to people. You know, I'm a big fan of having informational calls. What does it really mean to do this kind of work and to test this out and to try it out? You know, we can't always do an internship at a point in our life, but we certainly can volunteer in places. We certainly can talk to people to see, does this exist? And to add on to what you said with Adam Grant about that the career might not even exist. And I say this to people, no matter where you are in your life, in your career, there are so many things you haven't done yet that you don't even know you're going to be great at yet. So you're trying to define yourself by the strengths that you know now. And there are these innate strengths that we talk about with VIA, we talk about with Gallup, but then there's competencies that you don't even know that if you do, you're going to love, you're going to be fantastic at.
Well, Denise, I'm just imagining being one of the students at GW, sitting in a room with you and your enthusiasm and passion and vision and can do, that hope that you believe and you see a possibility, and then you're holding that larger frame for them in terms of the trajectory of what's required and also where they can go and really seeing them. So this is such a beautiful value that you bring at I imagine that age and stage of life, especially.
Well, thank you. And the reason, Phoebe, I say that I'm able to do this, all the credentialing, whatever, the reality is I went through my own career angst, career struggles where I was living in the woods into nowhere. I was in jobs, I moved to DC and I took a job at a nonprofit thinking I wanted to go somewhere. So I think that I'm coming from a place of truth. And it's interesting with something you said about hope. And I think about it as someone who got married later in life, and my story looks different than other people's because I got married and had children later in life. That a relationship coach I worked with, when I was struggling with, why am I dating all these guys and it's not working? And, what do I do? And she said, the one difference between my clients who have found love and those who don't? I said, what? She said, the ones that do never give up hope. And that stayed with me. And it's the same thing I feel like within careers, is that those who eventually find what they're meant to do in their life, and it doesn't have to be a calling. It could be the job that just brings them joy, that they feel satisfied with. It doesn't have to be this grand thing, but that finds those career that makes them happy, is they never gave up hope in that process.
And we had Dr. Dan Tomasulu on in March, who is the preeminent writer around hope, learned hopefulness. And he talks a lot about the pathways thinking and high hope people, which I know there's research on people that really are able to generate those different pathways. And if this doesn't work, I'll throw that out, I'll try this. And there's nothing like having a career coach or again, a circle of supports to help you really brainstorm and keep those options open, or just listen, as you said, and reflect back so they can have that courage to keep taking those making those experiments. So there's a few things here I wanted to call attention to. One is, thank you, Joelle just put in the Whole Being. We have another SIP program in the fall. There's a discount there. There's a link below. Let's go back to Amy Siegel. How do you advise clients on finding balance between your career goals and loyalty to an organization, its mission, and the desire to advance it despite frustration with an office culture?
Well, one is, I mean, obviously, if you're able to do something to transform an office culture, and that there's a point where you have to say, I need to pull back. However, been worked in the nonprofit world, and I work in public service now for scarily 25 years. I can't believe that. That organization could be one that you would be better volunteering for, or you could find another organization with the same mission and work for a different culture. Changing organizational culture is extraordinarily difficult. Even I've worked at small organizations and large organizations. So, what you're saying in that question is it's less about being a loyalty to that organization, but loyalty to that cause. And sometimes you have to pull yourself out and say, where am I better served? Is it for my own health that I can't get done what I want to do at that organization? And maybe, again, finding another place or another way to manifest and be able to work on that mission externally. We get this year, past couple of years, the pandemic is such a poignant reminder to all of us about how fragile life is. And we get one shot at this. One shot. And we have this opportunity to make choices that will allow us, and it's more than just career happiness. And I say this on my website, this is not about the job you want, this is not about the career you want, this is about the life you want. So does staying at that organization support the life that you want?
And I think that these are the questions that people are asking themselves at this time, because this has been so prolonged. And so there's another question here from Judy. What if you have to take a financial hit, risk to retirement, in order to change to more aligned position, that then you may eliminate a work stress, but create a financial or other life stressor?
So again, you have to be realistic to what works for you. I never want somebody to be taking a decision that doesn't feel good for the life that they want. So it's looking holistically. Is it pivoting to an organization? Is it sometimes I'm working with a client now where she might end up staying in an unhealthy job for a longer period to make a pivot that would allow her to pivot at a higher salary point. Again, if you're further along in your career, you might not have as much time with that. It's also, in this day and age, I would say the pandemic has opened up gig work and remote work in ways that could transform someone's ability to make those decisions. So you might be able to take a side job, a side gig that will help supplement this, get some side work before you even make that pivot to be able to, again, be able to pivot at a higher level, take a job that financially is higher because it's now, you have companies at headquarters all over the world that now you could maybe work for remotely. So there's different ways to think about this holistically. You have to think about the different levers and what you're willing at this point, which levers you're willing to dial down or dial back on what's important to you.
Thank you. So where can people find you? In addition to, we'll send the recording out tomorrow, and where you can find other recordings on the Whole Being website. So where can they find you, Denise?
CareerHappinessCoaching.com.
Okay,
That's my
I'm just
website.
going to put that in there.
Yeah, so that's my website, and I do coaching and presentations, and this is my side gig in addition to doing this, and this is what I love. I feel so lucky that the grant I was working on ran out of money, and they said, well, there's this job in career services. It seems like you're well suited for it. And 15 years ago, and I like to say I fell into what I was meant to do in my life. And I think about how I struggled about leaving the nonprofit world and the poverty alleviation world. And now I get to use these skills on a volunteer basis in that way, in ways that I never even imagined. So I love the idea of messy careers, because you just know what you're going to see. That's
And one of the positive psychology people that we reference wrote a book called Richard Weissman, The Luck Factor. And I think we studied that with Tal Ben Shahar. So the idea is that, the luck that I'm hearing is that you were ready for it. You knew yourself, you had this whole trajectory of all these different things you had done. You lived that experience and you really saw that opportunity and what could be possible. So in your mind, that job hadn't even been invented yet, right? As Adam Grant would say. And we talk a lot about possible selves in positive psychology, imagining what we could become, as well as, Laura King's research was before the best possible future self. It was what might have been. It was a research study that people had to write and really say goodbye very pragmatically. This is done now. It's finished. What can I learn from it and take forward?
Yeah, and all of this, Phoebe, gets down to the sense of what we're saying is it requires you to be vulnerable to who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And to take these masks off,
Mm-hmm.
and to be welcoming, and
Mm-hmm.
that's how I would want to end today, is thinking that
Yes.
you have to welcome vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yes.
is raw and messy, and as Brene Brown says, excruciating, but the gift that it allows you once you get that vulnerability shot, how it allows you to navigate in the world without those masks, the freedom that it gives you is extraordinary.
Well, thank you for embodying that and for your message today of hope, and also all your stories and how you've woven in so many strategies. I want to remind the group that tomorrow we'll send out the recordings from this week and also Denise's blog. And in the blog, she's got the vulnerability vaccine, and it's a 30-minute prompt for writing. And you can also find on her website here, careerhappinesscoaching.com, many more blogs and so many things that she has to share. So thank you, Denise, and happy birthday. Happy birthday, Denise. Happy birthday, Caroline. Thank you for your beautiful contribution today. And goodbye, everyone. We'll see you next Thursday with Dr. Sanj, who's coming to speak about positive medicine. He's an alumni from our program. We're taking Tuesday off because of the Tikkun celebration, and you'll see that on the JCC website. Bye-bye, everybody. See you. Thank you.
Thank you.